Guys, I've been in ministry for about 13 years now at a couple different churches, graduated Bible college, preached well over 1,000 sermons. I love Jesus. I've devoted my life to him. I couldn't see myself doing anything other than what I get to do for him, teaching the word, encouraging people, praying with people. I follow him, and yet there's still times where I just don't see him the way that I ought to. Just the other day, I had this weird thing going on. I can't really even explain what was happening, but I had this funky day where I just didn't believe Jesus wanted to hear and answer my prayers. It was weird. It's like, oh, you love other people and you want to hear their prayers, but you don't want to help me. And I was starting to just kind of believe that and roll with that thought. And what was happening on that day is that I wasn't seeing Jesus correctly. I wasn't feeling condemned and going through the whole process of oh, Jesus doesn't like me because of some sin I committed. It wasn't sin. That wasn't the issue at all. I just wasn't seeing him truthfully. Because I know the Bible says he longs to hear my prayers and bring me before the Father. And I think there's times when we all struggle with this. I think there's times when we all struggle to see Jesus the right way. Just this past Wednesday night at church, I was talking to a guy who I know loves Jesus. I mean, there's fruit just spilling out of this guy's life, and yet he was struggling to believe that he could really stand on the words of Jesus alone for his situation. He saw a testimony of how standing on the promises of Scripture helped another person, but he was struggling to believe God was going to do that for him. I mean, don't you have moments where you struggle to see God the right way? Hasn't there been times in your life where you have not viewed Jesus properly? You've had a twisted thought about Jesus, a different thought about Jesus, a thought that's not true about Jesus. You know, sometimes it's the tears that make our vision blurry to where we can't see him. But whatever the reason might be, if we don't see Jesus the right way, then we're not going to see anything else in life the right way. So how are we supposed to see him? I mean, I could give you a poll and you could give me a lot of answers and they'd probably be good answers, but what does he have to say about this? How does he tell us how we're supposed to see him? Today, I'm not asking you if you believe in Jesus. I'm asking you today how you're supposed to see Jesus. We're picking up today in the 12th chapter of John's Gospel. And in John chapter 12, beginning in verses 20 and 21, it says, "Now there were certain Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast. Then they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and asked him, saying, 'Sir, we wish to see Jesus.'" This is really interesting because these Greek men have traveled a long ways from home all the way to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover feast, which was one of the major feasts in Judaism. Now, it's 5 days before Christ's crucifixion. It's the same day Jesus rode into Jerusalem riding on a donkey. People started waving palm branches at him, and they began worshiping him and hailing him as the Messiah, as the Son of David. And in Christianity, we look back and celebrate that day and call it Palm Sunday. It's the Sunday before Jesus was crucified for the sins of humanity. But the Jews had no concept of Palm Sunday. According to the Jewish calendar, this day was happening on the 10th of Nisan. which was a very specific day for Israel that went all the way back to Moses and all the way back to Exodus chapter 12. God instructed Moses that on this day, which is 5 days before Passover, each Jewish family was to take a lamb. And they were to examine that lamb to make sure it was without spot or blemish. And this was the day the Passover lambs were inspected by all of the people to see if they were worthy enough to be accepted by God for sacrifice. And only prime, spotless, perfect lambs were accepted. God gave Moses a long list, and a lot of these lambs were not accepted. There was a strict list. These had to be the prime lambs of all of Israel. Now, on this day, Josephus the historian tells us that over 200,000 lambs were brought to the temple precincts. Now understand, Jerusalem normally had a population of about 600,000 people, but during the feast time, the city swelled to well over 2 million people. So every inn and house and barn and backyard were full of people sleeping at night. And on this day, each family brought a lamb to the temple to be examined. And in the midst of all this activity, here comes the sinless Lamb of God riding into Jerusalem to be examined, inspected carefully, and approved by the people. In days, all these lambs would be slaughtered and eaten for the Passover celebration. Likewise, in just days, God's lamb, God's perfect lamb, would also be slaughtered as a sacrifice, and he would be hanging on a cross. This is an interesting turn in the life of Jesus because he's no longer in hiding. Remember, there were times when people wanted to make him king, but Jesus would slip away and say, "My time has not come yet." He would heal people and then say, "Don't tell anybody about this," which is kind of interesting because in John chapter 9, we saw Jesus heal a man who was blind from birth. This guy's walking around town blind. Everyone knows he's blind. Jesus heals him right in the middle of the city and says, "Hey, don't tell anyone." What pressure is that? It's like, okay, do you want me to go around like bumping into stuff, like pretending? Like, what's the deal? What's happening here, you know? Instead of hiding now, Jesus is arranging. His hour had come, and he's ordering it all. His hand is on the steering wheel. Before, when they tried to make him king, he slipped away, but now they hail him and worship him, and he receives it openly. The Pharisees, those haters of Jesus, already had plans to kill him, but not now. Not at the feast time. That's not cool. That's not kosher. I mean, it's kind of against our law. We can't do it at the feast time. But Jesus is forcing their hand by entering into the city in this way. He's provoking them to arrest him in 4 days' time. Jesus is in complete control of the situation. He told them in John chapter 10, "Nobody takes my life. I lay it down on my own accord. You're not doing this to me. I'm in control. I'm driving the whole thing. I got a game plan. I've set it up from the foundations of the world. You are not going to take my life from me, Rome or Jerusalem. I'm coming, I'm arranging, and I'm doing this because I love humanity, because I cannot stand the thought of spending an eternity without people." He is doing all of this. And these 2 million people walking around in Jerusalem doing their own thing were somehow fitting into the supreme plan ordained by God before the foundation of the world. In the midst of all of these people, Jews who were worshiping him, there were a group of Greek men. We don't know how many men they were, but they're in the crowd as well. And they want to see Jesus. And so they find Philip, which is interesting because Philip is a Greek name. So it made sense to them to seek out and find the disciple with a Greek name. And understand who these men were. They were not men rooted in Judaism. They weren't steeped in the Jewish traditions and cultures. They did not know the scriptures like the rest of the people in town, and yet their perspective is amazing. They had something nobody else in town had. The Bible says the Jews only wanted to see Jesus do a sign. Well, I'll live for Jesus if he does a trick for me. If he shows me his power, then I'll commit to him. They only wanted to see a sign, but these Greek men wanted to see him. That's amazing to me. So they say, Philip, sir, we wish to see Jesus. Look at verse 22. Philip came and told Andrew, and in turn Andrew and Philip told Jesus. But Jesus answered them, saying, the hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Most assuredly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain. Jesus chose not to meet with them, but he did give them an answer that was meant for you and me as well. His answer is an analogy. His answer is a picture for them to ponder and think about. So let's think about it. When a grain of wheat falls to the ground, it's considered dead to Jesus, because God's definition of death is different than your and my definition. You see, humanity has this problem of seeing death as finality, as cessation of life. But to God, there is no such thing as cessation of life. Every person who is ever born is going to live forever. To God, his definition is always separation. It's like if someone were to fall over and die, we would say, oh, they're dead. But they're really not dead. What's happening is that their spirit and soul is just separating from their body. We have a hard time seeing that. God sees it clearly and perfectly. Our last breath on earth will be our first gasp of breath on the other side immediately. It's seamless. And so for the rest of today, whenever I use the word death, you have to know that I mean separation, because that's God's definition of death. It's never cessation. So when one grain of wheat dies, it separates from the rest of the wheat. But if that one little seed gets buried into the earth, what happens? Much more wheat grows up out of the ground. This little thing gets buried and you get this whole harvest. And Jesus uses this analogy, this picture, to describe his own death, burial, and resurrection. That his body was a seed. What kind of seed was it? Exclusive. One of a kind. Never again will there be another seed like it. Jesus as a seed, his body was separated from his Father on the cross as he absorbed all the sins of humanity into his person. His body, just as the kernel of grain, was buried underground. And just as that one little grain produces a harvest of wheat, when Jesus Christ rose again, he became the first fruits, the Bible says, of a whole harvest of people who will forever live in heaven with glorified, resurrected bodies. That one seed has produced all of this in this room and all of the churches around the world. Amen? That's amazing. It's a seed that keeps on giving. It's a seed that it was buried. It keeps on growing. It keeps on producing. God, as the vine dresser, keeps watering, keeps tending, watching over his people. And for 2,000 years, the church has been a force that people have hated on, tried to murder, tried to get out of the way through philosophizing it away, trying to get it away by making it uncool to culture, trying to get it away by introducing new philosophies that are junk like evolution. And yet, as kingdoms rise and as kingdoms fall, as people, great people live and die, the kingdom of Christ cannot be stopped. It keeps going because of the kind of seed that was first planted into the ground. It's amazing. These Greeks want to see him. They're waiting, twiddling their thumbs. In the midst of the crowd, they see Phil coming back. And they say, Phil. Remember Uncle Phil? You know what I'm talking about? Fresh Prince, come on. Uncle Phil. That's the image there. Uncle Phil. You're back. Yeah. Jesus has a message for you guys. Really? What did he say? Well, he said when a piece of grain goes into the dirt, it dies and a whole bunch of wheat come up after it. And they say, Uncle Phil, we told you we were Greeks, not geeks. Come on, what are you talking about? What's the deal here, right? So what is Jesus doing? What is he up to? What's the point? What's the bottom line? What is he doing? He's saying, if you guys really want to see me, you really want to see who I am, then here's the deal. There's only one way to see me rightly, and that's if you clearly focus on me and see me crucified, tortured, spit upon, rejected, buried into the ground, and risen the third day because death could not keep me down. That is the only way to see me. That is the only way for people to see humanity. And if you start seeing Jesus any other way, it's going to be cloudy. That is the starting point. That is the gospel. That is the entry point on how he has defined for us to see him, view him, think upon him. Why? Because however you see Jesus defines you. We're in a room mostly with people who believe in Jesus, but maybe there's a couple of you and maybe you kind of believe in Jesus, or you're trying to figure it out, or maybe you've rejected Jesus, you just are coming to pretend it's cool because of your girlfriend or something. I don't know. People come to church for all over reasons, right? But here's the thing. However you see Jesus ends up determining everything else about your existence, and nobody can escape that. Nobody can escape that. Your view of Jesus doesn't define him. He stays the same. But the way you see Jesus, however you respond or choose not to respond to Jesus, that shapes and defines your sum total, your destiny. It shapes how you see everything else in life. And if you don't see Jesus the right way, then you will not see anything in life the right way. You will not see love and relationships the right way. You will not see marriage the right way. You will not see sex, which God created, the right way. You will not view parenting the right way. You will not view politics the right way. You won't view the culture the right way. You will not view sin and death the right way. You are ultimately shaped by your view of Jesus. Every one of us. And don't you think the crowds of today are really similar to this crowd in Jerusalem who got pumped on Jesus for a couple days and then bailed on him and shouted, "Crucify him," a couple days later? They saw him, but they really didn't see him. If Jesus is only a bobblehead in your car, that's not really a bold step of faith in your life, you know? If people only see Jesus as a homeboy on a t-shirt, that's not really seeing him the right way. He's the Jewish Messiah, come to fulfill all 613 Old Testament laws. He was born of a virgin miraculously. He lived a sinless life. He never sinned one time. And yet he was convicted as though he was the greatest sinner of all. His beard was pulled out. He was tortured. He was crucified on a cross for the sins of the world. From the cross he said, "Father, forgive them." And he was buried in a rich man's tomb, and he rose from the grave on the third day, and he's coming back very soon. Amen, church? He's coming back soon. And when you see Jesus the right way, then you begin to see everything else about your life the right way. Let's talk about that. What do I mean by that, seeing your life in the right way? Well, something that it really blows my mind. I mean, yesterday, last few days, my mind has really just been blown thinking about this again. And it's that death, burial, and resurrection is not just something that happened historically to Jesus. The concept of death, burial, and resurrection was introduced by God long before Jesus entered the earth. In fact, the principle of death, burial, and resurrection is everywhere. Think about it. Jesus likened his own death, burial, and resurrection to a grain of wheat. This speaks something for us, guys, that God has woven this principle of death, burial, and resurrection into his entire created universe. It's in the ocean, it's in the mountains and the trees, it's even in the birds and the bees. Check this out. This is awesome. On the third day of creation, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 11, God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth," and it was so. And if you're saying, "I have no idea why you're excited about this verse, Josh, and what in the world does this have to do with death, burial, and resurrection?" Well, guys, it has everything to do with death, burial, and resurrection, because God only created apple trees once. He only created lemon trees once. Why do we have lemon trees thousands of years later? Because of the principle, the process of death, burial, and resurrection. You have an apple. That apple separates from the tree. Remember? According to God, death means separation. The outer casing of that apple rots or it's eaten. And what happens to that seed after it's separated? It's buried into the ground. And once it's buried into the ground, you get a whole new tree. You lose one little apple to get a whole new tree. And so much of our time is spent whining and crying about the little apple we lost when God's wanting to give us a whole new tree. Over and over, death, burial, resurrection. Seeds planted, harvests coming. It's not just in the trees. I wasn't lying when I said it's in the birds and the bees. Death, burial, and resurrection is happening. The reason why you exist is because of death, burial, and resurrection. What I mean is there is a seed in a man's body. That seed separates from his body. It is planted and buried where you cannot see it in a woman's womb. And out comes a miracle, a baby from this seed. Death, burial, resurrection. It's everywhere in God's creation. And what I really want you guys to understand today is that this principle of death, burial, and resurrection not only works in a kernel of wheat or in an apple seed or in a seed that goes and makes a baby, but it's working in your everyday life, socially, economically, unless God doesn't want to be involved in those areas in your life, or does he? This principle is trying to be fit into your life constantly, repetitively, in cycles throughout the rest of your lifetime. That's why the Apostle Paul could make this statement in Genesis chapter 2, verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. Wait. I thought Jesus was crucified. How can Paul say, I have been crucified with Christ? It's because Paul understood there is a repetitive process of death, burial, and resurrection that happens in your life while you're still here on earth. And when you get to the point, guys, this is maturity. This is Christian maturity. When you get to the point where you can see when God is applying these principles, it makes the whole world for you. It changes your outlook on everything because you're able to see Jesus rightly in the highs and in the lows. You keep your eyes on him through everything. And guys, when you're seeing Jesus the right way, then you start to see everything else in your life the right way. Paul said, again in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 10, through suffering. Stop, Josh. Don't go there. Through suffering, our bodies continue to share in the death of Jesus so that the life of Jesus may also be seen in our bodies. Now you tell me, what comes first? The death or the life? What comes first? Death. We don't want to hear that, do we? Why couldn't Paul just excuse the suffering part and just talked about the life? I mean, we all want the life of Jesus in us. We want resurrection power, newness of life, supernatural enablement, just working in and bearing fruit out of our lifestyle. But what Paul is saying is that he felt that the death of Jesus was being spiritually worked inside of him. Kind of like, the death of Jesus and his resurrection was not merely a historical fact, but it's also a spiritual reality in my life. Romans chapter 6 says we have been baptized into the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. This is what that means. This is what it looks like to be immersed into the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. I mean, what else did he mean when he said you need to take up your cross and follow me? Does that sound all rosy to you? Or does that sound like there's going to be some trials of faith appointed by God to see where you're at? To see, as he said in Deuteronomy chapter 8, I brought you, my people, through this wilderness to test you and to see what was really in your heart. Not that he doesn't know, but so that it would become clear and plain to you. Guys, when I went through what I had to go through with my son Gage, knowing his chest was going to be split wide open, not knowing if he was going to make it, trust me, God had a way of opening up everything in my heart, laying it out on the table, and showing me what he saw. I got to see everything of what he saw in my heart and in my life. Every believer wants the life of Jesus evident in them. But Paul knew it could only happen if he also carried the dying of Jesus in him. And of all the things God wants to work into our lives, there are some things that can only be inserted through suffering. I mean, some of you would not even be here today. Some of you would not even be a follower of Jesus today if it were not for suffering. And you're able to look back and thank him for it. And this is not a popular message in Christianity today, but it's biblical and it's extremely powerful if you'll hold on to it with everything you got. Paul understood that the same principles that the Father applied to Jesus' life were going to be applied into his own life. And you must embrace that God's wanting to apply them into your life too. And because Paul embraced this instead of running away from it, he could see clearly, and you know what? Life was never too complicated for Paul to figure out. Wouldn't you like your own life to never get to the point where it's too complicated for you to figure it out? Where you can always just get a tap on, oh, this is what's happening. Oh, this is what's happening. Oh, yeah, that's clear to me what's happening. Doesn't that sound appealing? Then understand, Every Christian is going to be taken by God through this process of death, burial, and resurrection. And what I ultimately mean is that God is always trying to separate you from something. He's trying to separate something or someone from you. He's always trying to get something to die in your life. Do you understand what I'm saying? It could be something of matter. It could be something spiritual. It could be a person. It could be an emotion. It could be a belief for the future. It could be a thought about the past. But he's wanting to make it die and be buried in your life. He wants you to die to things. And when he does this, he does it in order to bring in things that are like his resurrection. But you got to remember, the life comes after the dying. Some of you, think about it, some of you have been separated from something recently. Don't be confused by the fiery trial, which is to try you, Peter said. It's not a strange thing that this is happening to you. You're a follower of Jesus. That's what it means. What has God separated you from recently? For others of you, God is trying to separate you from something, but you keep holding on in disobedience. Fighting. Haven't you ever wrestled with God that way? I think we all have. It's time to separate. Or you're going to have turmoil. You're going to have confusion. You're going to have unrest. Go through the process. Others of you just feel buried and you don't know what to do. You feel buried, you don't know what to do. Well, here's what you do. You do what God told Moses to do. Because God had just separated him and the people of Israel from Egypt. They were dead to slavery. And now they were buried in the hot, dry desert with nowhere to go. Ocean on the other side with no boats. Noah's not coming to the rescue. Mountains on the other side too high to climb. And a whole massive Egyptian army unleashed with chariots charging straight for them. They could capitulate, give up, and drown. They could try to run from an enemy that was ultimately going to catch them. Or they could try to fight in the power of their flesh. And God looks at Moses and says, Moses, number one, don't you be afraid. Do not be afraid. You better not be afraid. Because God's love cancels out fear. Secondly, this is what I want you to do. I want you to, he tells Moses, be still. Oh, God, that's so good for my heart. I'm always trying to do things and figure it out. God just says, be still. Moses, you don't got to do nothing. The third thing he says is watch the salvation of the Lord. Exodus chapter 14, look it up. Watch the salvation of the Lord. Moses didn't, you don't have to do anything. They were buried, and God was telling them, don't do anything. Rely on my resurrection power. I'm going to do something, Moses. Can you believe that for your own life today if you feel buried? You can try to scratch, you can try to fight. Why don't you just do what Jesus said and take heart, let your heart not be troubled because he's overcome the world, and watch God bring a supernatural elevator down to your grave and watch him lift you up and do something awesome in your life. I've seen this happen with many of you. I've seen this happen to plenty of men who've been separated from their jobs. Married, without a job. What do I do? Trying to do everything to get a job. Nothing's happening. They feel buried. I mean, when you can't provide that mindset, it's like when we're single guys, I mean, we can live in a van down by the river. Oh, dang. Sorry for that image. But when we have a wife and kids, there's that pressure. And I've seen men just say, you know what? I'm going to keep coming to church. I'm going to keep washing my wife with the water of the word. I'm going to actually take advantage that I have more time to spend with her and cook her breakfast and stuff. And on that third day, whenever that third day was for them, God brought them something that resulted in a such better life than they had before. So much better. I've seen it happen. I've had to go through my processes of this, of God wanting to separate me from sin and bury me from former sins. I went through a couple-year process of this with a certain issue in my life. When I was a senior in high school, my family moved to Utah, the great Mormon state. And it was actually a good thing for me because God did that to separate me from a life of drugs, acid, just all that stuff, selling and everything. And he took me to the land where everybody pretends like there's no sin to like get me away from that. It was interesting what he did, but there was no one to do drugs with there, really. And I needed to be separated. And my life was just, if I was still in that former life, I'd either be an addict or I'd be in jail or something. My former best friend has called me on the phone when I was in my early 20s, crying with a needle stuck in his arm of heroin, saying, Josh, what do I do? I'm going to flip out. And me and him were like this. I would have been right there with him. And God took me to Utah, and I started walking with God. But here's the thing about Utah. There were no Christian girls to date. And when a young man is like 19, 20 years old, that's a very hard thing. And it got to me, and I compromised, and I started dating this Mormon girl. And I liked her. I tried to share the gospel with her family. And she got to the place where she said, I'll marry you outside of the Mormon church. Because her mother did that with her father. Her father, I think, was Presbyterian. And she married him outside the church, and then she converted him, later in life. And so she's like, I'll do it, but I know you're going to become a Mormon later on in life. And I knew the truth. And I studied Mormonism like nobody's business because I wanted it to be true. I was in such compromise. I wished it would be true, and I was looking for ways for it to be true. And God showed me just the complete error and lie that it is. It's sad. And so I got to a point where God's saying, Josh, it's going to hurt now or be a jerk and break her heart later because this isn't going to work out. So I did what I needed to do, and I said, this can't go any further. I remember saying, I'm never going to call you or pursue you ever again. And at that time, I'm going to college in Provo, Utah. 98% Mormon in Provo, Utah. No joke. BYU, everything like that. And it was so bad. I went to a comedy club in Provo, Utah one time. And in the midst of about 500 people, the comedian says, wait. Is there anybody in here who's not Mormon? I'm the only dude who raises his hand. He looks at me and he says, Lucifer. And I'm like, whoa, dude, that's harsh. Let me just leave now, please, before the lights turn on. Really. I would start semester and I would have study groups with people. And we'd be hanging out for like 2 weeks together, going to pizza parlors and studying in our apartments. And then that conversation came up, 20-some-year-old students in Utah, the question, so where'd you serve on your mission? And I said, well, I think I've done like 3. And they said, what? That's kind of funny. We don't do that. And when they realized I was a Mormon, none of them talked to me ever again. Honestly. There's about 6 of them. And they didn't call me. They avoided me in the hallways. It was hard. No one to date, nothing like that. And I was separated from my former life of rebellion, but I felt very buried, very isolated. And then in God's timing, in the northeast corner of Utah, in a small country town, in a galaxy far, far away, a bear and deer hunting beauty queen called Pocahontas. She was a believer. My uncle led her to Christ. And it wasn't like I got with Mackenzie by default. It really was. She was this shining, golden beauty queen. I mean, she's really cute. She's beautiful, you know what I mean? And God just brought her into my life at the right time. And what was God doing? He was just taking me through a process of separation, feeling buried, and he blessed me by just waiting for him, not compromising. If I would have married that girl, I wouldn't be standing here today. I was that close. You've come close. If you're close today, you hang in there. You take heart. And you set your heart on Jesus. And you don't compromise. And you take up your cross. And you say, it's heavy. Yeah, but I'm going to do this. And you set your face towards pilgrimage. And you do what you got to do for Jesus. Amen? Because it's worth it. It is so worth it. It's not easy, but it's worth it. If you look at all the stories from the Bible, guys, you'll see that God took all of these great men and women through the same process of death, burial, resurrection. It just came in a different package and different circumstances. Let's do this. This is going to be fun. There's 3 groups. You're going to represent death. You're going to represent burial. You're the great group. You came on this side because you're extra blessed today. You're the resurrection group, okay? When I point at you like this, you guys are going to say death. Are you ready? Here we go. Come on, you can do better. You guys are burial. Ready? You guys are resurrection. Joseph. Think about Joe. Suffered and was separated from his family. That was his. Forgotten about and buried in a jail cell for years of his life. That was his. Seemingly out of nowhere, God raises him up to be the second in charge of Egypt. That was his. Yes. What about Moses? Separated from his whole life in Egypt. That was his. Come on. I won't trick you again, I promise. Buried in the wilderness for 40 years as a lowly shepherd, isolated from society. That was his. Raised up by God to be a great leader and the deliverer of Israel. That is. Yes, David, King David, separated from his family, separated from society as he was running scared in the desert from Saul. That was his. Buried out in the wilderness for almost 15 years. That's his. And then after Saul dies, David's raised up to be Israel's greatest king. Yes, the Apostle Paul, separated from everything he knew about Judaism, separated from his wealth, separated from his status. He's buried, separated in the city of Tarsus for 7 years. That was his. Raised up to become the greatest missionary in church history. Come on. We could do this all day. You want me to go more? Nod your head. Say yeah. Just say yeah. Because I'm going to. John, as an old man, separated from his church in Ephesus. That was his. Buried on a little tightly deserted island called Patmos. That is. But while he was on that hot little island, God gave him the greatest vision of all, and he pinned it and called it the book of Revelation. That is. When you see Jesus the right way, you start to see everything else the right way. You see your life clearly. Where are you at? What's God doing? Because you must remember that for Christians, resurrection comes after crucifixion. Blessing comes after suffering. Joy comes after sorrow. The peace is going to come after the pain. Heaven is going to come after we die. But this only applies to Christians and those who are connected to Jesus. This does not apply to people who are separated from him. All things don't happen for a reason except for people who believe in Jesus Christ. Guys, if you only remember one thing from today, then remember this. See your own life in light of death, burial, and resurrection. What is God trying to separate you from, but you insist on staying connected to it? Is it something material or is it an idea? I know it's something, because if God wasn't trying to separate us from anything, then we'd be called to heaven. So because you and because I exist, he's wanting to separate us from something. For some of you, this is the week where it's time to you to obey God. This week is the time for you to say, okay, I'm going to stop playing around. I'm going to choose to separate. And when you make that choice, he will give you the power you need to do it. He doesn't expect you to do it in your own power. He just wants you to decide to do it. What is he calling you to separate from today and this week? What is God trying to bury in your life, but you keep trying to resuscitate it? Haven't you ever done that? Where something's about to die and God's saying yes, and then you do some CPR and breathe life into it and resuscitate it, and God says no. Oh my gosh. Again? Let the thing die. We're so worried about holding on. Did you know that your heart has a good, strong set of hands? You knew you had eyes to see, and you knew you had ears to hear and a mouth to speak, but your heart has arms. And sometimes those arms grab onto things, and it's hard to let go of that stuff. And it can be a whole range of things. It could be something you can't let go of that you did in your past. It could be something that's hard for you to let go of that someone else did something to you from your past. Let it die today. It can be an ideology, a dream you had. Let it die. It could be a person you're not supposed to be connected with. Let it separate. Because if you let go and if you let it die, do you know what's going to happen? Jesus is going to raise up something beautiful in your life by his power and love and through his Spirit. If you keep holding on and you don't let go of that thing, you are going to quench the Spirit in your life, and you will be frustrated. You will not be able to see clearly. Everything will be foggy, and you will live through a hallucinated life with unclear vision. Isn't it great that when Jesus gives you revelation, it's like, for me, putting my contacts on. I wake up and I'm like, ugh. I put my contacts on and there's this clarity. There's this vision. God can give you that today, guys. What is God telling you to be separated from? What is God telling you to let go of? Beginning today, you need to respond to his will. Tomorrow, you need to respond to this. This week, you need to be thinking about this. These Greek men wanted to see Jesus. Jesus replied, there's only one way to see me, and that's crucified, buried, and resurrected. And if you see Jesus the right way, then you will see everything else in life the right way. Amen? As we transition into worship, if you're here today and if you do not know Jesus Christ, if you've wandered from Jesus Christ, wherever you're at, if you just know there's something not right between you and God, today's a massive day for you. Today he's calling you to what? Do you remember? He didn't tell Moses he had to do anything. He's not telling you to join a religion. He's not telling you there's a bunch of rules. Christianity is about a person. It's about connecting to Jesus. That's what he wants from you. That's what he wants. For you to open your heart, for you to humble yourself. That if you got sin in your life, to say, here's my sin, God. I'm going to try to not hide it from you anymore. I'm not going to justify it anymore. If you don't know Jesus today, then you need to confess your sins and invite him into your heart. Because without Jesus, you will be separated from God for eternity. The cure is simple. Jesus, when he was on the cross, was paying the penalty you and I deserved. If you simply believe and say, Jesus, take away my sins, give me yourself, you become a child of God. It's so simple. It's a free gift. In a second, we're going to pray. We're going to close our eyes. And if you need to receive Jesus today, I'm going to ask you to slip up your hand and I'm going to pray for you, okay? But for others of you, if you also need to respond, where you have connection to Christ, but for some reason you can't quite explain it, but today there is like a tractor beam on you, and no matter how you try to dodge it, it's on you. And God is saying, you, not the person in front of you, not the person next to you, it's you. If that's you, even if it's the slightest tug on your heart, it's God. And he's saying, let me in. Let me work in your life. If that's you, I'm going to ask you to respond as well, okay? So let's close our eyes. Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, thank you for Jesus. Jesus, thank you for saving a wretch like me. Thank you for the reality of a new life, for heaven, for how you really can change people, change circumstances. And God, I pray that you'd pour out your Spirit here today and you'd work right now, God. Come and work. And speak to people. Reveal yourself to people. And friends, if that's you, if you are the one and you know you need to respond to Jesus today, I want to pray for you. And so would you slip up your hand? Go ahead and do that now. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Awesome. Yes, ma'am, I see you up here in the front. Yes, several of you. Awesome. You guys can put your hands down. Awesome, guys. You're making such a good choice. He sees your hearts. He knows what's going on. Is there anyone else? You need Jesus today. Do you hear him speaking to you? Is he calling out to you? Is there anyone else at all? Awesome, yeah, I see you. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, God. Continue to just pour out your Spirit right now. Work in hearts in such a great way. And friends, if that's you with eyes still closed, just start to pray something similar to this. In your own heart, just talk to Jesus. Say, Jesus, I need you. I want you. I'm lost without you. Tell him that you want him to forgive you. Tell him you know something's not right. Say, Jesus, I know you can make me right. Say, forgive me. Fill me with your Spirit. Fill me with eternal life, and he will. If you need to separate today, ask him. Say, give me power to separate from things that have attached themselves for me for too long. God, separate me, please. If you feel buried today, brother or sister, you grit your teeth and you carry your cross and you follow your Savior to that place of rejection. You follow him to that place of humility, and you let him crucify whatever needs to be crucified in your own life. And you be buried with him, because you're not alone. He's buried with you. And you will see something beautiful come from the ashes of your life. Thank you, Father. You're so good. You're so good. God, as we continue to respond to you and as we worship you, God, I pray that you'd help us worship you as resurrected people, giving our whole hearts, minds, voices to you. God, pour out your Spirit as we worship you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.